This is the cultural factors and health disparities for isolated individuals, which is farmers and individuals living in rural areas, by Whitney Beckman and Nicole Hyam. So the media portrays farmers and other individuals living in rural areas often as uneducated, dirty. They tend to wear beat-up clothing, usually torn, can be very poor, obese with poor health, and this a lot of times is in regards to the women in the media, as well as having issues with substance abuse and poor mental health. So farming is often generational, and children are raised to take over when the parents can no longer work. A lot of times other cyclic things include alcoholism, drug abuse, tobacco abuse, and mental health disabilities. And according to Bahir, Basnet, and Campbell, individuals living in rural areas oftentimes do not have appropriate access to proper mental health facilities. They said 71% of children admitted to the pre-adolescent unit at Lincoln Prairie Behavioral Health Center between July and December 2012 reported either a parent or a sibling with a psychiatric disorder, which continues to add to that cycle of vulnerability to mental health disorders. This can also apply to children raised in households with substance abuse. So peers can, either help those who are kind of in that cyclic situation, or they can also create a potential barrier. Within the farming community as a whole, peers can be very helpful. If someone is to get sick or injured, the whole community generally comes together to make sure that things are taken care of, such as the house, the farm itself, crops, cattle, or whatever animals there might be, things like that, to make sure that the farmer, as well as the farmer's family or the isolated individual's family, is taken care of. However, that can also, surrounding yourself with those individuals can also be a potential barrier to getting the help that you need if they, might be against getting help specifically for mental health disorders. If substance abuse is a problem within the community, they may, try to tell you that it's not a big deal, don't get help. So that's kind of one issue. And then the other issue is just that living in a rural area is a barrier in its own, because you're generally quite a distance from the specialized medical care that you might need. So the legal system, for the most part, will hinder this population. If, isolated individuals do need legal counsel, they're going to incur expensive legal fees, such as court fees and attorney fees, which can be a problem because it is not uncommon for people living in rural areas to have less money than others might. Along with living in rural areas comes the fact that there's probably no legal help available close by, which means if you need to seek legal help, or if you have to go to court for any reason, chances are you're going to end up driving quite a ways. That means obviously paying for the drive time, the gas, as well as simply missing that time where you would otherwise be able to work. Something else that can hinder these populations is all of the regulations that come down from the government. There are many regulations regarding how, when, and where farmers can grow crops or run livestock, and oftentimes there's even permits required depending on what you're trying to run, and that can mean even more fees incurred. So health disparities that affect this particular population include things like geographic location, and that affects everything from accessing healthcare to specialists if needed to healthy food options, things like that. There's also the disparities of socioeconomic status, disability, work-related injuries, and unemployment. So according to the USDA, rural USA is less racially diverse than urban areas, and white individuals make up nearly 80% of those populations. Hispanics make up 9%, and blacks 8%. However, race and discrimination are everywhere and can affect anyone from any race. Religion is very important to farming and small rural communities. And according to Swearinga, the Little White Church and the Red Schoolhouse definitely define rural America. So when you live in small communities, there is generally a prevailing religion. Here in Utah, that religion is usually Latter-day Saint. However, elsewhere you could run into Catholic, Baptist, Protestant, or other communities. Those within the community definitely expect you to be at church on Sunday. They notice when you're not there. And if someone new comes to the area and they don't follow that religion or they don't show up, they can definitely be treated differently. As far as gender goes, there is the prevailing thought that women can't be farmers. They're not big enough, strong enough, capable, and that they need to stay home and watch the children and tend the house and have dinner ready for when the men get home. So geographic location, obviously we're talking about rural populations, which means geographically they are away from, the major cities, things like that. So things that can affect include simply being farther away from healthcare. It's possible to have, maybe a small clinic that's open 1 or 2 days a week, but definitely no specialists and generally no emergency services either. This affects people of this population because health outcomes tend to be worse because accessing care is difficult. They generally put off accessing care until it can't be put off any longer, which then makes it more difficult to treat because you've waited too long. However, telehealth is something that can actually increase good outcomes for these populations. It's allowing access to specialists. If you can't drive, you can call and talk to these people, these doctors and providers from your home. It's also allowing access to help where maybe it's not severe enough to need to see someone in person. Maybe you just need to get a prescription refilled or something like that. Telehealth options are great options which are helping these rural communities. So implicit and explicit biases faced by this population overlap quite a bit. So they're going to definitely have some overlap here, but some biases that these populations face include thinking that they're redneck or hillbilly, that they're poor, they can be stupid or uneducated, oftentimes old-fashioned values, and may think that they're dirty. And disparities affect everywhere in the world. So regions of the world where disparities are higher do not necessarily correlate with higher disparities in the rural populations. And here are our references. Thank you.